People say grief brings families together, but on the day I buried my husband, I learned that grief can also expose the darkest corners of human nature. As I stood beside his grave, the cold wind cutting into my skin, all I felt was the weight of loss slowly crushing my chest. I didn't have diamonds. I didn't have designer clothes. I didn't have the polished elegance his wealthy family flaunted like armor. What I had was a small, worn-out ring, a simple $3 band he bought for me at a street fair on the day we first met. That ring wasn't about money. It was the moment our lives intertwined. It was love in its purest form. So I placed it gently on his grave. And that's when the laughter started. Behind me, his family snickered, whispering loud enough for me to hear. A $3 ring? How pathetic. Good. Maybe now she understands her place. She thought she'd inherit our fortune. She's leaving with nothing. Each word stabbed deeper than the winter air. They didn't even try to hide their bitterness. To them, I was the outsider, the poor girl who somehow married into their empire. They believed the money, the status, the legacy all belonged to them. They had no idea that the man they underestimated had left behind a will they knew nothing about. And the ring they mocked? It wasn't just a memory. It was the key. The reason he trusted me more than anyone else in the world. What happened next didn't just silence their laughter. It shattered their pride, exposed their greed, and changed my life in a way none of them ever saw coming. Because hidden behind their cruelty was $50 million worth of truth. When my husband died unexpectedly at just 49, everyone around me assumed I would fall apart, and maybe I did in small hidden ways, but the world didn't get the dramatic collapse they expected. People whispered at the funeral about how calm I looked, how composed I seemed standing beside his casket. But what no one understood was that grief doesn't always look like wailing or collapsing. Sometimes grief looks like numbness, a kind of quiet shock that sits heavy in your chest. And that numbness followed me everywhere, especially when I walked through the cemetery with the small red velvet box in my hand, a box that held the $3 ring he had proposed to me with. Yes, $3, not 300, not 3,000, just 3. A toy ring he had bought as a joke on our second date. When he teased that if he ever married me, he'd save the big bucks for the honeymoon snacks. When he actually proposed years later in the kitchen of our small apartment, he used that same ring because he said he loved the meaning behind it, and we laughed like teenagers because back then it wasn't about money or diamonds or impressing anyone. It was about us. But standing at his grave, clutching that ring, I knew people would judge me for it. And I wasn't wrong. The moment I placed the little ring on top of his gravestone, I heard the gasps behind me. His sister, always polished and sharp-tongued, muttered loudly enough for the wind to carry it. She had the nerve to bring that cheap ring? After everything? After the way he treated her like a queen. And then they laughed. Actual laughter in a cemetery, at a funeral, while I stood there with tears I refused to let fall. They didn't know our story. They didn't know how little money ever mattered to him, or to me. They didn't know why that ring meant everything. Why it held more memories than any diamond ever could. But their judgment didn't end there. Later that afternoon, when we gathered at his mother's house, I overheard them again, his sister, his cousin, even his mother chiming in, whispering about how he should have married someone with a little more pride, someone who didn't make him look poor, someone who could at least pretend he meant something. They said I embarrassed the family by bringing a cheap ring to the grave. They said I didn't honor him properly. They said I should have bought something expensive, something flashy, something worthy of him. As if grief had a price tag, as if love did. I sat there silently, letting their words float around me like dust settling on forgotten furniture. I didn't defend myself. I didn't explain that the ring represented the beginning of our love. I didn't tell them he used to joke that the $3 ring was more loyal than a diamond, because diamonds crack under pressure. I didn't tell them he had insisted, repeatedly, that if anything ever happened to him, I should bury him with that ring. They didn't deserve to know. But the truth is, deep inside, their judgment stung, not because I believed them, but because they believed themselves. They thought they knew the value of a marriage by the value of a ring. They thought they knew me by the size of my jewelry. They thought they knew him by the image they created in their own minds. And they had no idea how wrong they were. That night, After everyone left, I sat alone in his old study, his favorite room, surrounded by his books, his dusty globe, his leather armchair that still smelled faintly like his cologne. I opened the drawers, looking for the photos he had taken on our last vacation, hoping to find comfort. But instead, I found a sealed envelope with my name written in his handwriting. Steady, confident, the handwriting I used to watch while he wrote grocery lists and little notes to stick on the fridge. The envelope felt heavy, heavier than paper should, and when I opened it, something thick slid onto my lap. A legal document. At first, my brain didn't process what I was looking at. Not until I read the bold heading across the top. Last will and testament. And beneath it, beneficiary, my wife. My heart hammered so loudly I could hear it over the rain tapping against the window. The document wasn't typed by some cheap online service. It was notarized, signed, and stamped by an attorney I didn't recognize, and attached to it was something even more shocking. A letter from his lawyer, and then another envelope, and another, all addressed to me. I opened them with shaking hands, and what I found made the room tilt, made my breath catch, made the entire world slow down in disbelief. My husband, my simple, humble, low-key husband, had left me $50 million. $50 million. Not 5,000, not 50,000, not even 500,000. $50 million. I read the number over and over, convinced I was hallucinating, convinced grief was twisting my vision. But no, it was real. And that wasn't even the craziest part. The will stated that he had been quietly running a chain of businesses he never told anyone about. His mother didn't know. His sister didn't know. His cousins didn't know. They all believed he lived an average, modest life working a job he should have grown out of by now, as his sister used to say. They mocked him. They called him unambitious. They said he married beneath him, that he settled. But the truth, hidden behind years of silence, was that he was a millionaire many times over. And he left everything to me. Everything. And attached to the will was a handwritten letter. If they laughed at the ring, let them choke on this. I sat frozen in that old study chair, the will trembling in my hands as if it carried electricity. My husband, my quiet, humble jeans and t-shirt husband, had been hiding a $50 million fortune like it was nothing more than an inside joke between him and the universe. And through the swirl of shock and confusion, one realization hit me with the force of a hurricane. The very people who'd laughed at my $3 ring, the ones who mocked me at his grave, the ones who whispered that I didn't value him, were the same people who had absolutely no idea who he really was, or what he valued, or what he chose. They didn't know about the nights he'd stayed awake building his businesses in silence, keeping them hidden because he didn't want a life filled with greedy hands or fake relatives. They didn't know about the long conversations we'd had on the balcony, where he told me that if he ever had real money, he wouldn't let anyone use him. They didn't know that he used to watch his sister complain about rich husbands online while she borrowed money from him she never paid back. They didn't know that he told me, months before his death, that if something ever happened to him, he wanted to protect me from the very same people who pretended to love him most. And now, sitting there with that will in my hands, I realized he had built his last act of love carefully, quietly, intentionally. He hadn't left me money. He had left me a message that said, "You mattered more than they ever will." As the night deepened and the storm outside intensified, I kept reading through the documents. A list of businesses, properties, bank accounts, investments, all under his name, all transferred to me immediately and solely. And at the bottom of the final document, there was a small handwritten note, short, but so unmistakably him. "Don't let them rewrite our story. You know the truth. That's enough." I leaned back in his leather chair, letting the weight of everything settle into my bones. For the first time since he died, I cried, not because I lost him, but because even in death, he found a way to hold me, protect me, love me. And I cried because I knew what was coming next. His family, the same people who mocked me at his grave, would eventually come crawling. They'd come smiling, pretending to care, pretending to mourn, pretending to comfort me. But behind those fake tears would be calculations, greed, desperation, And when they found out, because secrets this big don't stay buried forever, they would break themselves trying to rewrite a will that was ironclad, notarized, and completely out of their grasp. What I didn't expect, though, was how quickly that moment would come. The very next morning, before the sun fully rose, I heard knocking, fast, urgent, loud. When I opened the door, his sister barged in like the house belonged to her. She didn't say hello. She didn't ask how I was. She didn't even wait to be invited. She marched right into the living room and looked around like she was taking inventory. Then she turned to me and said in a tone that tried and failed to sound gentle, "Since you didn't contribute much to this family, we need to discuss what he left behind. It's only fair that we split it." Split what? I almost laughed. She didn't know a thing. Not one piece of documentation. Not one business. Not one cent. All she knew was the little savings account he kept visible, which had less than $2,000 in it. So I asked, "Split what exactly?" And she replied, "Don't play dumb. His assets. Whatever he owned. Mom needs her share. And so do I." For a moment, I just watched her entitlement, her complete lack of shame, her absolute belief that she was owed something simply because she thought she was superior to me. Then I calmly said, "He didn't leave you anything." She actually laughed. "Don't be ridiculous. He wouldn't leave you everything. He wasn't stupid, but he did." And I wasn't going to waste breath explaining that to her. Instead, I walked to his study, picked up the sealed envelope with her name on it, the one the lawyer had sent for each family member, and placed it in her hand. "This is from his attorney," I said. "It explains everything." She snatched it like she was expecting gold to fall out. But the moment she opened it, her face started changing color. First confusion, then disbelief, then anger so sharp it almost buzzed in the room. "What is this?" she yelled. "His will," I answered softly. "This can't be real. This has to be fake. He wouldn't do this. He wouldn't leave you everything." Her voice cracked on the word "you." She hated that he chose me. She hated that he trusted me. She hated that I, someone she never thought was good enough, was the only one he valued enough to protect. She kept reading the letter for several minutes, pacing, muttering, shaking her head over and over. And then she snapped. "This isn't over. Mom will want answers. The lawyer will hear from us. We're contesting this. You won't get away with whatever you're trying to pull." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The will was locked so tight even the state couldn't break it. But watching her storm out, furious and humiliated, I felt a strange sensation, a mixture of sadness, vindication, and a peace I didn't expect. Because deep down, I realized something important. They weren't angry because I had the money. They were angry because he chose to give it to me. They were angry because the truth shattered the story they had built in their heads, the story where they were the center of his world, and I was just an accessory. But the truth was right there in ink, signatures, and legal stamps. He trusted me. He loved me. He valued me. And nothing, not their bitterness, not their jealousy, not their mockery at his grave, could rewrite that truth. That night, as I held the will one more time before placing it in the safe, I whispered to him, "Thank you. For the ring. For the love. For the trust. For everything." Because while the world laughed at my $3 ring, they had no idea I was holding the key to a $50 million legacy. And I hadn't even begun to use it yet. For the next 3 days, I walked through town as if I were wrapped in fog. Every corner store, every gas station, every mailbox seemed to whisper about me. Women who once smiled at me now exchanged tight-lipped glances. Men offered me those pitying nods people give a widow they assume is drowning in bitterness. But beneath their forced sympathy, I could feel the undercurrent, the smirk they carried because they thought they finally knew the truth about my marriage. "She wore a $3 ring," they'd mutter, because there was nothing real between them. But they were wrong, painfully, violently wrong. The ring wasn't a symbol of poverty or neglect. It was a symbol of the secret my husband and I promised to protect, a secret most people would never believe. And yet, as humiliating as the gossip was, what haunted me more was the note the lawyer had slid under my door that morning, a handwritten message from my late husband, dated a month before his death, telling me to stay strong until the 14th. No explanation, no hint, just that. I stared at it for hours, reading it again and again, hearing his voice in the back of my mind. Why the 14th? What was waiting for me? Why now? And how was it all connected to a cheap ring and a will nobody had ever heard about? By sunset, a new worry gnawed at me. A dark SUV had started parking across the street from my house. Same car, same time, every evening. Windows tinted black. No movement. No plates I could see. At first I thought I was imagining things, grief playing tricks with my eyes. But on the second night, when I stepped out to take my trash to the curb, I heard the distinct click of a camera shutter. My blood froze. Someone was watching me. Someone who didn't want to be seen. I backed into the house and locked the door, trembling as I peered through the blinds. The car didn't move. Not an inch. It was as if the shadows themselves were keeping guard. My stomach twisted. Why would anyone care enough to watch a widow, whose husband had left her nothing but a cheap ring? Unless they knew something I didn't. Unless the ring wasn't cheap. Unless the nothing everyone mocked me for was actually everything someone else wanted. The next morning, the town gossip mill reached a fever pitch. I walked into the grocery store for bread and milk, and every step felt like it echoed between aisles filled with whispered judgment. Look at her, an old woman hissed behind me. She spent all those years with a rich man and didn't get a dime. Another added, maybe he caught her cheating. Maybe that's why she only got a thrift store ring. I kept walking, refusing to let them see how deep their words cut. But inside, my hands were shaking. They didn't know my husband. They didn't know the life we lived, the life we chose to keep private. They didn't know that he hated attention, hated displays of wealth, hated the vultures who circled anyone with money. The ring had been his idea, part of a promise we made to each other, to protect something far more valuable than gold. But their voices still sliced into me, each rumor sharper than the last, until I could barely breathe. I left my cart, pushed through the automatic doors, and stepped into the parking lot, straight into the path of the same black SUV. This time, the driver's window lowered 2 inches. Enough for me to see the faint outline of a man wearing leather gloves and holding something small between his fingers. My heart stopped. It was a photograph of me standing at my husband's grave. On the back, scribbled in ink, were 3 words, "You're not ready." I stumbled backward, pulse roaring in my ears. Who was he? What did he want? And how was he connected to my husband? I barely made it home before collapsing on the couch, clutching the note and feeling the weight of the ring on my finger. For the first time, I twisted it and felt something shift inside the band. A small click. A hidden mechanism. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. Slowly, carefully, I pushed the thin metal in the opposite direction, and the inner lining slid open. My world spun. Inside, so small I almost missed it, was a folded micropaper, thinner than a whisper. I pulled it out with trembling fingers. On it, in my husband's distinct handwriting, were coordinates and a warning. If they find this first, everything is lost. I dropped the ring, heart pounding so loud it felt like thunder in my chest. Suddenly the SUV, the watchers, the whispers, the will, it all snapped together like a trap closing around me. This wasn't about poverty or humiliation. This wasn't even about inheritance. This was about a secret my husband died trying to protect. And now the weight of that secret was sitting in the palm of my hand. And someone somewhere was willing to watch me, stalk me, and possibly kill me to get it. I didn't sleep that night. Not even for a second. I kept the tiny folded micropaper under my pillow like it was a heartbeat I couldn't lose. Every sound outside unsettled me. The crunch of gravel, the creak of the porch steps, even the wind brushing the window felt like fingers trying to pry their way inside. At 3:17 a.m., I thought I heard footsteps near my backyard fence. I didn't dare look. I simply sat on the edge of the bed, clutching the ring and staring at the coordinates my husband had left behind. Why would he hide them inside something as fragile and insignificant as a $3 ring? Why not a safe, a lockbox, a lawyer? Unless he knew someone close to him was watching. Unless he knew the people after him would search everything except something so cheap no one would bother to examine it. The realization hit me with a cold shock. My husband wasn't trying to keep the world from thinking he was poor. He was keeping very dangerous people from knowing where he hid something far more valuable. Something tied to those coordinates. When dawn finally crept across the living room floor, I gathered what little courage I had left and typed the numbers into my phone. My throat tightened as the map pinged a location. A remote cabin 2 hours outside of town, deep in the woods, surrounded by nothing but miles of government-owned land. My husband had never once mentioned it, not in casual stories, not during long nights on the couch, not even when reminiscing about his childhood. A location he intentionally kept hidden. That alone told me I couldn't trust the police. If he didn't trust the system with this, why should I? And the SUV parked outside my house only confirmed it. Whoever those men were, they wanted what my husband died protecting. And they were willing to follow me, intimidate me, and wait for the moment I slipped. My hands trembled as I packed a small bag, flashlight, water, old phone without GPS, and the ring. I tucked the coordinates into my bra, close to my skin. I checked the window. The SUV was gone, but that didn't comfort me. Shadows don't disappear, they reposition. I got into my car, started the engine, and drove without turning on music, my heart beating like a war drum. Every time a vehicle appeared in my mirror, I panicked. Every time I rounded a curve, I expected the SUV to reappear. But the highway remained strangely empty, almost too quiet. It wasn't until I reached the old logging road that led toward the coordinates that the fear truly hit me. Because parked at the entrance, half hidden behind a fallen tree, was the same black SUV. Empty. Waiting. I swallowed hard. They were already here. And if I turned back now, I would never learn the truth my husband died to leave behind. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel and pushed forward, knowing full well I was walking into something I might not walk out of. The dirt path grew narrower, twisting like a wounded snake between towering pines. Branches scraped the sides of my car, their shrill screeching echoing in the silence. I kept glancing into the rearview mirror, terrified I'd see those black-tinted windows closing in. But the road behind remained empty, eerily so. After 20 minutes, the path opened into a small clearing, and there it stood. A weathered cabin with boarded windows, sagging porch steps, and moss creeping up its walls. It looked abandoned for at least a decade. But the moment I stepped out of my car, the air shifted. Heavy, charged, as if someone else had just been standing where I was. I approached the cabin cautiously, each footstep crunching through layers of pine needles. When I reached the front door, my stomach dropped. The padlock hanging from it wasn't rusted. It was new, uncomfortably new, meaning someone had been here recently, maybe still was. With trembling fingers, I touched the lock. And that's when I noticed it, carved into the side of the steel in tiny engraved letters, MM+E, keep your promise. My knees almost buckled. My husband had used our initials. He was telling me I belonged here. Ignoring the tremor in my hands, I pulled the ring from my pocket again, studying it under the morning light. The cheap metal glinted faintly, almost expectantly. I slid the band into the keyhole on instinct. It fit. When I twisted it, the lock snapped open with a soft click. My breath caught in my throat. He had planned all of this. He had built this entire trail of secrets with the assumption I would one day follow it. Inside, the cabin smelled of dust and cedar. Sunlight pierced through cracks in the boards, creating thin golden lines across the floor. The silence felt sacred, like I had stepped into a part of him he never shared with the world. But then I noticed something else. Footprints in the dust. Fresh ones, larger than mine. Someone else had already been inside. My pulse quickened as I stepped deeper into the cabin. At the far end stood a wooden table, and on top of it lay a single object, a leather-bound notebook with my husband's handwriting on the cover, along with a silver flash drive taped to the front. Just as I reached out to touch it, a floorboard creaked behind me. Slow, heavy. I froze. Another step. And another. Someone was inside the cabin. Someone had followed me. My breath lodged in my chest as a shadow stretched across the doorway, growing longer, darker, swallowing the light inch by inch. Then a deep voice, one I had never heard before, yet somehow it felt like it had been following me for years, spoke from the doorway. You weren't supposed to find this alone. I spun around, heart slamming into my ribs, and saw him, the man from the SUV, no longer hiding, no longer pretending to blend in. His eyes locked onto the ring in my hand, burning with an intensity that made my blood run cold. "Give me what he left you," he demanded. "It doesn't belong to you." Behind him, another man stepped into view, and another. They weren't here to negotiate. They were here to take. And suddenly I understood the final terrible truth. Whatever my husband hid in this cabin, whatever was on that flash drive or in that notebook was worth killing for. And I was the last loose end standing in their way. I didn't know fear could freeze your spine yet sharpen your instincts at the same time. But as I stood in that dusty cabin doorway, with two strange men positioned like shadows blocking the single exit, I felt both sensations battling inside me. The taller one stepped closer, and in the dim slice of moonlight that leaked through the slanted roof, his eyes flashed with an intensity that wasn't anger, it was urgency, like time was running out for all of us. "We're not here to hurt you," he repeated, raising his empty hand slowly to show he wasn't armed. But lies always have a temperature, and his felt cold. The shorter man, however, kept shifting his weight, glancing toward the trees outside as if he expected someone, or something, else to show up. Every instinct in my body screamed, don't trust either of them. The notebook and flash drive inside my pocket suddenly felt heavier than bricks. "You broke into my home," I said, forcing my voice to stay steady. "You followed me. You waited for me. And you want me to believe this isn't dangerous?" My pulse roared in my ears as the tall man hesitated before answering. "We didn't break in," he said quietly. "Your husband left instructions." My heart stuttered. That name, my husband, coming from a stranger's mouth, felt like someone was pushing a knife through a memory. "He trusted us," the man continued. "And he told us someone far more dangerous would come after what you're carrying." The shorter man stepped forward quickly. "Show us the notebook. Now. We don't have time." His tone wasn't pleading, it was commanding. And it triggered something in me. Something fierce. Something protective. I stepped backward, gripping my phone tighter in my hand, though I knew there was no signal this deep in the woods. "You don't get to demand anything," I snapped. "If you knew my husband, tell me something, anything. Only he would know." That's when the tall man's face softened with something like pain. "He called you Bluebird," he said. The words hit me so hard I staggered. That was a private nickname, one he whispered only when we were alone, usually right before bed, usually when he sensed I wasn't okay. I hated that these strangers had such an intimate piece of me. "He made us promise," the tall man added. "If anything happened to him, we'd find you before they did." "They?" I asked, my throat tight. "Who is they?" The shorter man answered without missing a beat. "The people he stole from." My stomach dropped. The air in the cabin turned heavier, thicker, like breathing inside smoke. "Stole? My husband? A man who could barely lie about eating the last cookie?" "You've got the wrong person," I said, though my voice cracked. "My husband wasn't, he was," the tall man interrupted softly. "But not for himself." That made even less sense, and my heartbeat thundered louder. I needed space. I needed air. I needed out. So I did the only logical thing. I pretended to faint. My knees buckled. I let my weight fall, and as both men lunged forward to catch me, I shoved hard against the shorter one's chest, using the momentum to slip between them and sprint toward the door. I could hear them shout behind me, but adrenaline had already taken full control of my legs. I ran like the trees were reaching for me, like the cold night was slapping my face awake, like my husband's ghost was pulling me forward. The forest floor snapped under my boots. Branches streaked my arms, and my lungs burned, but I didn't stop. Not until I reached the ditch near the road, and threw myself behind a fallen log. I could hear them searching, leaves crunching, voices calling my name. "We're not your enemies," one yelled. "You're making this harder." "Bluebird, please," the tall man shouted. Hearing that nickname from him made my stomach twist violently, but I stayed silent, perfectly still. I waited until their footsteps faded far enough, then crawled out, ran to my car, and peeled out so fast gravel sprayed behind me like sparks. I drove without direction, just distance, until the woods blurred into suburbs and the suburbs blurred into city lights. Only when I finally parked behind a closed diner did my hands start shaking uncontrollably. I pulled out the notebook and flash drive, placing them on the passenger seat like dangerous artifacts. I whispered into the empty air, "What were you hiding from me?" And that question echoed inside the car like a haunting. Sitting alone in the cold parking lot, I forced myself to breathe slower, to stop shaking, to think with something other than pure panic. If what those men said was even partially true, then I had just run from the only people trying to protect me. But if they were lying, if they were part of the danger, then I had escaped just in time. I opened the notebook again, turning page after page until my husband's handwriting shifted from sweet memories to more frantic entries. Names, numbers, bank routing codes, meeting locations. And on the last page was a message written so messily the ink had bled. If something happens to me, don't trust anyone. Not even the ones who say they knew me. Find the blue door. My breath hitched. The blue door. He had mentioned it once, almost years ago, something about a place he hoped I'd never have to visit. A place he said was only for emergencies. I typed the address he scribbled beneath it into my phone. Still no signal. Of course. I turned the key, started the engine, and began driving toward the city's industrial district, my headlights cutting through the fog. Every few blocks, I scanned the rearview mirror expecting to see the two men following me, but no one was there. When I finally reached the old manufacturing district, the streets were nearly empty. Warehouses lined both sides, most abandoned, some converted into storage units or sketchy offices. I drove slowly until I saw it, an old brick building with a chipped cobalt blue metal door, almost hidden behind a rusting dumpster. My stomach twisted. I parked a block away and approached on foot. The closer I got, the colder the air felt, as if the entire street breathed differently around this place. I pressed my ear to the door. Silence. I pushed gently. It opened. A long hallway stretched ahead, lit by a flickering fluorescent light. I stepped inside, closing the door quietly behind me. The smell of old paper, dust, and faint engine oil hit immediately. I followed the hallway to a room with shelves full of binders, boxes, and what looked like old government equipment. My husband had been here. I could feel it. Then something caught my eye, a small metal lockbox on a table with my name engraved on the top. My full name. My knees weakened. My breath caught in my chest. With trembling fingers, I opened it. Inside were photographs, my husband meeting with people I had never seen, exchanging envelopes, shaking hands under dim streetlights. Some photos had timestamps. All were taken at night. Beneath the photos was a letter. My name was written across the front in his handwriting. I unfolded it slowly, tears already blurring my vision. Bluebird, if you're reading this, then I couldn't outrun them. I did what I had to do, not to betray you, but to protect you. The money I moved wasn't mine. It belonged to people who hurt families, including one of my closest friends. I couldn't stand by anymore. I took what they stole, and I planned to expose everything. They found out, and now they'll come for you because they think I left it all with you. If strangers find you first, trust no one, not even men claiming to be friends. Not unless they prove themselves. I swallowed hard, tears dripping onto the letter. Beneath that paragraph was something even more chilling. The flash drive holds all the evidence, everything dirty they ever did. The notebook explains the rest. If I didn't make it home, finish what I started. And please, don't let them scare you into silence. You're stronger than you believe, Bluebird. That's why I married you. My heart cracked wide open. I sank into the chair, clutching the letter to my chest as grief collided with terror in a single tidal wave. Suddenly, footsteps echoed in the hallway. Heavy, fast, getting closer. I shot up, grabbing the flash drive and notebook. The light flickered harder. A shadow passed the doorway. "We know you're in here," a deep voice called. Not the tall man. Not the short man. Someone else. Someone far more threatening. I backed toward the emergency door on the opposite wall, my hands shaking so badly I fumbled with the lock. The footsteps grew louder, closer. Then, Bang! The door I came through burst open, and everything snapped into chaos. The days after the will reading felt like I was walking through an unfamiliar version of my old life, one reshaped by secrets, greed, and a truth too heavy for the woman I used to be. People in town whispered more fiercely than ever, not because of my $3 ring anymore, but because James's hidden fortune had landed in my hands like a storm no one saw coming. I didn't feel rich. I felt like someone had handed me the weight of a collapsing world and expected me to stand tall. The house felt colder after his mother and brother stormed out, vowing they would challenge the will in every court possible, sure that I had seduced him into leaving everything to me. But they didn't know the truth, not the truth behind the ring, not the truth behind his last message, not the truth behind the man they assumed they knew. Every time I passed the doorway of his office, I felt a familiar ache. The same ache I felt at his grave when I clutched the little ring that meant everything to him. That ring wasn't about money. It was about the promise we made when we had nothing but each other. The world thought they saw humiliation when I placed it on his grave. They thought they saw a poor widow honoring a man with a cheap trinket. But they didn't know the truth, that he had bought that ring during our hardest nights, the nights when he was working double shifts and we were counting pennies, the nights when love was all we had. So when his family mocked it, when his mother scoffed loud enough for strangers to hear, it wasn't embarrassment that washed over me, it was grief. But now, those same people who mocked the ring were suddenly showing up at my door, pretending to check on me. Their pity had transformed into greed the moment they learned he left me everything. Every account, every share, every property, every secret asset he had worked years to hide from his own family. They had never cared about him when he was alive. They had cared about his money, his connections, his future stability. And when he chose me, a woman they considered beneath him, their resentment only grew stronger. I could still hear his brothers shouting at the lawyer, "She doesn't deserve it. She was nothing before him." It echoed in my mind the same way the town's whispers once did. But James knew exactly what he was doing, and the more I read through his handwritten letters, the more I realized he had planned everything long before his death, planned it to protect me. He knew his family would try to tear me apart, try to paint me as an opportunist, try to take everything from me just as they had tried to control him. His mother wanted power. His brother wanted money. But what James wanted was peace. And the only way he could ensure I got it was by preparing everything behind the scenes, shielding me even when I didn't know I needed protection. For nights, I sat alone in the dim living room reading his letters, each one revealing a different piece of the man he had become. He wrote about the betrayal he felt from his family, about how they had only shown up when they wanted loans or favors, how they had belittled him and tried to manipulate him because he was the successful one. He wrote about how he feared they would destroy me after he was gone, that they would try to strip me of dignity the same way they had tried to strip him of independence. His last letter, the one the lawyer handed me in private, was the hardest to read. He told me he remembered the night we sat on the porch with nothing but the chilly air and our dreams, the night he slipped the $3 ring on my finger because he couldn't afford anything else, but still wanted me to know he chose me, only me. "Please don't ever be ashamed of that ring," he wrote. "It was the first moment I realized I wanted to protect you for the rest of my life." Those words tore through me because even from the grave, he was still protecting me, still shielding me from the cruelty of the world around us. And as people, strangers, relatives, neighbors continued to attempt to fill my head with lies and guilt, I kept hearing his voice telling me to stand firm. I wasn't the poor widow they mocked. I was the woman he trusted with everything he had ever built. But not everyone wanted to hurt me. After the story of the will spread through town like wildfire, a few old friends who had drifted away because of his toxic family reached out. They told me stories about James the First had never heard, stories of him bragging about me at work, telling his colleagues that I was his backbone, the reason he pushed so hard to succeed. They told me about the nights he secretly donated to shelters, helped co-workers in crisis, and paid for strangers' groceries without telling a soul. That was the man I loved, the man behind the quiet smile and late-night exhaustion. And as I listened to their stories, his mother's bitter accusations that I had trapped him, used him, ruined him, began to crumble inside me. I began to understand why he hid his wealth from them, why he hid the documents, why he placed everything in my name. That wasn't an accident, that was self-defense. One evening, as I walked to his grave with fresh flowers, I overheard two women whispering again. Not mocking me this time, but marveling. She stayed loyal through everything, one said softly. Everyone else disappeared when he needed them. She didn't. Their words didn't erase the pain of being judged, mocked, humiliated, or accused, but they did remind me that despite everything, love had won in the end. Real love, not the kind that flaunts diamonds, not the kind that impresses crowds, not the kind that folds under pressure. Love that survives gossip, greed, and betrayal. Love that builds a legacy even death can't erase. Standing at his grave with the same $3 ring in my hand, I felt something shift inside me. Not guilt, not fear, but power. Not the kind of power his family loved, the kind tied to money or status or manipulation. This was the power of truth, the power of loyalty, the power of knowing that I was the one he trusted in the end. His fortune didn't make me powerful, his love did. I wasn't going to waste that gift hiding or shrinking. Instead, I began using the money exactly as he would have wanted, not to boast or punish, but to build. I funded the charity he dreamed about. I paid off medical bills for the families he once helped quietly. I set up scholarships in his name. With every act of kindness, I felt him closer, felt his presence guiding me, felt the weight of the world lift little by little. His mother and brother eventually gave up their legal threats when the court upheld the will, but I didn't celebrate their defeat. I didn't need to. Their own actions had exposed them more than any courtroom could. They had already lost the thing they treasured most, not the money, but the illusion that they controlled him. And as for me, the woman they thought was beneath them, the one they laughed at and insulted, I walked away not with revenge, but with purpose. Because in the end, the real inheritance wasn't the $50 million. It was the truth behind the $3 ring, the symbol of a love they never understood. A love money could never buy. A love that outlived them all. I barely slept that night, replaying every moment of Henry's funeral and the strange shift in everyone's behavior since the lawyer hinted that a private clause in Henry's will concern me directly. It felt as if the whole world had suddenly turned to stare, neighbors whispering on porches, his siblings sending tense texts, and even coworkers calling as though they suddenly remembered my existence. The same people who mocked my little $3 ring, who judged me like I was some gold-digging outsider who didn't deserve a place in Henry's life, were now circling me like vultures sensing something valuable hidden behind my silence. By dawn, I realized that their sudden curiosity wasn't kindness, it was fear. Fear of what Henry may have left behind, fear of the secrets he might have confessed, fear that the woman they dismissed, humiliated, and underestimated might actually hold a piece of information that could shatter everything they believed about him and about themselves. So, I dressed quietly, made myself coffee, and sat by the window, replaying that moment when Henry first slipped that tiny ring onto my finger. He laughed because it wasn't fancy, because it was the only thing he could afford that week, because he said love shouldn't need diamonds to feel real. That memory, pure, simple, and untouched by the politics of money, felt like a warm blanket around my heart. And yet, here I was, clutching that same ring while preparing to walk into a lawyer's office where everyone else expected to hear a confession, a scandal, or maybe even a secret betrayal. They had no idea that Henry's truth was far bigger and far more explosive than any of them could imagine. When I arrived at the law firm, every single person was already there. His brother, his sister, two cousins who hadn't visited Henry once during his illness, but showed up dressed like they were auditioning for a family drama TV pilot. And even Margaret, the woman who spent the entire funeral whispering that my ring looked cheap enough to come from a vending machine. Their eyes locked on me the second I stepped through the door, and I felt the weight of their resentment like a spotlight. The lawyer raised an eyebrow as if to acknowledge that everyone had clearly arrived early for one reason. They thought Henry might have left something unexpected behind, and they desperately wanted to know what it was. The room buzzed with low voices, nervous laughter, and fake condolences. Then the lawyer closed the door, clicked the lock, and said, "What you're about to hear is legally binding and cannot be contested." Instantly, the whispers died. You could feel every heartbeat in the room. He opened the sealed envelope, cleared his throat, and began reading Henry's voice written in ink, calm, deliberate, and unmistakably honest. And when Henry's letter pivoted from speaking to everyone to speaking directly to me, the room froze. My name echoed against the walls. He described how people judged our marriage, insulted the simplicity of our life, and assumed I married him for security he never had. Then his voice, steady even from the grave, revealed what he had discovered months before: a hidden inheritance, a business share he never knew existed, assets passed down from a grandfather no one talked about, and a trust fund that became active only after Henry turned 40. Everyone leaned forward, eyes wide, jaws tense, because Henry's next sentence would change every life in that room forever. "I leave it all," he wrote, "every cent of it to my wife." And the moment those words hit the air, the room erupted, gasps, denial, accusations, and furious stares, while I sat perfectly still, holding my $3 ring, realizing Henry had just protected me in the most extraordinary way a man could. For a moment, it felt like the entire room was drowning in shock, the air thick with disbelief, as Henry's family struggled to process what they had just heard. His sister, Linda, sprang to her feet first, face red, voice trembling, accusing the lawyer of misreading, misinterpreting, or outright lying. His brother, Mark, slammed his hand on the table so hard the pens jumped, shouting that Henry would never leave everything to a woman who wore a ring cheaper than a cup of coffee. Their outrage came like a storm, messy, loud, and painfully predictable. But I didn't say a word. I didn't flinch, didn't gasp, didn't even blink. Instead, I sat there with my hands folded, calm in a way none of them understood. Because deep down, in a place no one else could trespass, I already knew Henry loved me enough to do something just like this. I could almost hear his voice, steady, warm, telling me that this moment was his final defense of me, the last boundary he drew against the cruelty I had quietly endured for years. The lawyer lifted his gaze, stern and unshaken, reminding everyone that Henry's will had been recorded, notarized, and reviewed by 2 independent attorneys. "There is no dispute," he said. "This is legal, final, and cannot be overturned." Their faces collapsed, shock melting into fury, disappointment swirling into envy, as they realized Henry's truth wasn't going to bend for their entitlement. Suddenly, the same people who mocked me at the funeral, who pointed at my $3 ring with smug smiles, now stared at me as if I had stolen the crown jewels. But even under that pressure, I held my ground, my back straight, my expression firm. Because for the first time since Henry died, I felt him standing behind me. I drove for hours with Henry's letter on the passenger seat, the coordinates typed into the GPS like some silent guardian guiding me toward a truth I wasn't sure I was ready for. The highway stretched out like a ribbon in front of me, and all I could hear was Henry's voice echoing in my head. "Go there only when you're ready." I didn't know whether I was ready, but I knew I had to go. The sun was low by the time I reached the address, a private cabin tucked deep into a quiet, wooded area Henry had never once mentioned in all our years together. It looked abandoned from a distance, weathered wood, a porch sagging slightly, tall grass whispering around the steps, but something about it felt alive. I stepped onto the creaking boards, my heart punching against my ribs, and used the small brass key from the envelope. The lock clicked open with a soft, almost welcoming sound. Inside, the air smelled like old cedar and thyme. Dust motes drifted through the fading light like tiny ghosts. And then I saw it. Against the far wall, lit by a single slanted beam of sunlight, stood a safe, a large one, bolted into the floor, cold and intimidating. On top of it lay a sealed envelope with my name written in Henry's handwriting. My pulse jumped. The room felt smaller, heavier. I picked up the letter, my fingers trembling as I broke the seal. Inside was a message that made my knees weaken. "Everything I never told you starts here. What you find in this safe will explain everything. My past, my decisions, and the danger I tried to keep away from you. Do not open it if you're not prepared for the truth." For a moment, I stood frozen, my breath trapped in my chest. Danger? Past? Secrets? That wasn't the quiet, gentle man I knew. But then again, maybe I never knew all of him. And for the first time since his death, I realized Henry wasn't just protecting me from his family. He had been protecting me from something far bigger. My hand shook as I typed in the numbers Henry had scribbled at the bottom of the letter. Each beep from the safe keypad echoing off the empty cabin walls, like a drumbeat building towards some inevitable truth. When the final number was entered, the safe gave a heavy metallic click and released its door with a low groan. I held my breath as I pulled it open. Inside, instead of stacks of money or the usual dramatic movie cliches, there were files, thick ones, along with photos, documents, and what looked like a worn leather journal with Henry's initials pressed into the cover. The top file was stamped with something that made my blood run cold: confidential, Federal Witness Protection Program. My vision blurred for a second, and I had to blink hard to steady myself. Henry? Witness protection? My sweet, quiet, soft-spoken husband. Living under a new identity? Protecting me from a life he never talked about? I grabbed the journal first, flipping through pages filled with entries that didn't sound like the man I knew. There were names I didn't recognize, references to someone dangerous he had testified against, and repeated lines about keeping me safe. By the time I finished reading the last entry, dated only 1 month before his death, my heart was hammering so violently I thought it might burst. The entry said, "If anything happens to me unexpectedly, it won't be an accident. If she's reading this, they might already know who she is. She has to disappear. She has to live." My throat tightened. A chill raced down my spine. Suddenly, the cabin didn't feel empty anymore. It felt watched. My instinct screamed at me to move. I shoveled everything into my bag, slammed the safe shut, and raced out of the cabin with my heart in my throat. As I reached the car and looked back one last time, a dark SUV I hadn't seen before was parked halfway down the dirt road. Its engine was running. Its headlights were on. And someone inside was watching me. The moment I saw the SUV idling on the dirt road, something instinctive and primal took over. My pulse skyrocketed, and my body moved before my mind could catch up. I dove into my car, slammed the doors, and locked them so fast the clicks sounded like a gunshot in the still air. My hands trembled as I turned the key, the engine coughing to life while adrenaline surged like electricity through my veins. When I glanced up, the SUV's headlights brightened, sharply, deliberately, as if signaling that they knew exactly who I was, exactly what I had just found, and exactly what they had come for. The gravel spat out behind me as I sped down the narrow road, my tires skidding on loose dirt while my heart beat so violently I could taste metal. I checked my rearview mirror and cursed under my breath when the SUV pulled forward, matching my speed effortlessly. They weren't just following me, they were hunting me. The files in my passenger seat suddenly felt like dynamite. Every bump of the road made the journal shift, the corner of Henry's handwriting peeking out as if he were whispering, "Run." Branches scraped the sides of my car like skeletal fingers while the shadows of the forest closed in around me. I dug my foot deeper into the gas pedal, lungs burning, eyes stinging, praying the road would widen or lead to a town or a highway, anything but another dead end. As I reached a fork in the road, I spun the wheel right, my car fishtailing before straightening as I shot forward. For a split second, I thought I'd lost them. The road behind me was empty, silent, too silent. My breath trembled in my chest as I slowed just slightly, gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles whitened. But then, from the trees on the left, the SUV burst out again. They had taken a different route. They knew these roads, and they were done waiting. Panic clawed up my throat, but I forced myself to think, really think, because fear was useless if it didn't come with a plan. Henry's words from the journal replayed in my mind. If they come for her, she has to disappear. Maybe he had known this chase would happen. Maybe he had prepared for it. I remembered something from the cabin, the small, folded map tucked inside the journal, marked with an X and a note, emergency route. I fumbled through my bag with one hand while steering wildly with the other, the map crinkling between my fingers just as the SUV rammed the rear of my car. The impact exploded through me, slamming my chest into the seatbelt so hard it knocked the breath from my lungs. My car swerved, tires screaming. I bit down a cry, straightened the wheel, and checked the map with shaking eyes. The emergency route led to an old service tunnel, one Henry had apparently used during his years in hiding. If I could reach it, I had a chance. I veered onto a dirt trail, so narrow branches snapped against the windows like whips. The SUV followed, closing in, their engine growling like a predator savoring the chase. Suddenly, the trail dipped downward into a ditch-like path surrounded by trees. I didn't think. I plunged forward, the car jolting violently as I navigated the uneven ground. The SUV hesitated just long enough for me to gain a few seconds. Ahead, I saw it. Half buried in vines and rust, an old tunnel entrance carved into the hillside. I floored it. My car shot inside, just as the SUV skidded to a halt outside, its lights flooding the tunnel's mouth. For a moment, everything went silent except my own ragged breathing. But I knew this wasn't over, because footsteps, multiple, echoed into the tunnel behind me. They weren't giving up. Not until they had what Henry left behind. The tunnel swallowed me in a cold, echoing darkness that felt alive, thick, damp air clinging to my skin while my footsteps splashed through shallow puddles. My flashlight flickered weakly, barely illuminating the crumbling walls. Behind me, the footsteps grew louder, sharper, more determined. Whoever they weren't masked amateurs. They were trained, confident, and closing in fast. My pulse hammered like a war drum as I sprinted deeper into the tunnel, clutching Henry's journal to my chest, as if it were the only lifeline I had left. Then, up ahead, a faint glimmer of daylight appeared, a small metal grate leading to the old drainage exit Henry had drawn on the map. I shoved the journal into my backpack, scaled the rusted ladder, and slammed my shoulder against the grate until it flew open with a screech. Cool evening air rushed over me as I crawled into the open field behind the woods, sucking in oxygen like someone starved for life. But just as I pushed to my feet, a gun clicked behind me. "Give us the files," the man hissed, his voice steady, emotionless, as if he were asking for a glass of water instead of threatening to kill me. Two more figures emerged behind him. Their faces were shadowed, but their posture screamed government, or worse, private contractors with no oversight. My throat tightened with fear, but then something shifted inside me. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was Henry's courage echoing through me. Or maybe it was the fact that I knew the truth now. The truth these men had killed for. Slowly, I stepped back from them, keeping my hands visible. "You don't need the files," I whispered, "because they're already gone." Confusion flickered across their eyes. For the first time, they looked unsure. "What did you do?" the man growled. I lifted my chin. "I mailed copies to every major newsroom in the country 30 minutes ago." Their faces drained of color. Sirens wailed in the distance, multiple sets, drawing closer. Henry had planned for this, and I had just delivered the final blow. The men panicked, exchanging frantic looks as the distant sirens grew into an approaching storm. Flashing red and blue lights burst through the trees just as they turned to run. Within seconds, federal officers swarmed the field, shouting commands, tackling the men to the ground, and ripping weapons from their hands. I stood frozen, trembling as adrenaline drained from my body in waves. One of the agents approached me, an older woman with stern eyes softened by empathy. "You're safe now," she said gently, guiding me away from the chaos. "We've been trying to crack this case for years. Your husband left evidence no one else could get." Her words hit me like a punch to the chest. Henry hadn't abandoned me. He hadn't left me in confusion or danger. He had been trying to protect me the only way he knew, by giving me the truth when the world thought he was gone. Hours later, wrapped in a blanket at the precinct, I handed over the original files and Henry's journal, my fingers lingering on the pages as if touching them kept him alive somehow. The agent promised witness protection, relocation, a fresh start far from the people who had hunted both of us. And for the first time since Henry's death, I felt something other than fear. I felt peace. Weeks later, I visited Henry's grave with a single sunflower, the same kind he used to bring me on our better days. I knelt, placed the flower gently on the stone, and whispered, "They can't hurt anyone anymore." "You won, Henry." You really won. A warm breeze brushed against me, rustling the leaves as if he were answering back. I stood up straighter, wiped my tears, and walked away, not broken, not lost, but reborn. Because the truth didn't just expose their darkness, it freed me from mine.